I don't know if everyone has been paying attention to what's been happening in Panama. Now, I haven't had a chance to talk about this yet. I've been talking about a lot of things, and there's been a lot of uprisings going on around the world. But now it's time to talk about Panama because people in Panama have had enough. A couple days ago, I showed you what was going on in Sri Lanka, how the people said, screw this, went into the prime minister's home and said, get out, and then they swam in his pool. It looks as though people in Panama have also had enough with this corrupt economy, and they have also decided to rise up. Listen to this. What is behind the largest protest in Panama in years? It says in years, you guys. As the country continues to battle ongoing protests and a financial crisis, we take a look at the protesters' demands and the government's response. So look at this picture, you guys. You see this? Do you see how all of them are rising up? So let's go ahead and get into this. Thousands of Panamanian protesters have taken to the streets in recent weeks to demand the government put a stop to rising inflation and corruption. So you see, guys, same issue that they were dealing with Sri Lanka, inflation and corruption. President Laurentino Cortizo recently announced measures to cut fuel costs and put a cap on the price of basic food items. But protesters said they were not enough and promised to continue demonstrating. So you hear this? He said he was going to cut fuel costs and he was going to put a cap on the price of basic food items. But basically, he did the bare minimum. He did just enough to get by. And so the people in Panama was like, oh no, this is not a time where you can continue to give us crumbs. You have to do more. So people continue to demonstrate. Now let's go on here. Here is what you should know about the protest. Some of the longest to have taken place in Panama in decades. That's how crazy this is, you guys. This Algeria site keeps moving. But why is Panama having protests, and what are the protesters' demands? The latest protests come as Panama battles inflation. The inflation rate is 4.2% in May. Unemployment numbers are about 10%. That's insane. And an increase in fuel costs of almost 50% since January. Jesus. That's one piece of it, just one part. Teachers were the first group to demonstrate at the start of July, but they have since been joined by other groups, including construction workers, students, and members of indigenous groups. So you guys see how this works? One group of workers started it, and then other groups of workers joined them. That's how you do it. Pretty sure class divide here. So people who are part of the lower classes here that were struggling financially, they decided to get, this is what we need to do here. This is what I've been talking about. The same way you have Starbucks workers on strike, you have now, Apple workers starting to go on strike, Chipotle, all these different industries here where the workers are going on strike and they're trying to unionize. Imagine if all of them came together and said, now let's all hit the streets. Imagine what that would do in this country. That's what I've been talking about. Let's go back in here. It goes on to say, initially, the protesters called for the freezing and reduction of fuel prices, a price cap on food, and an increase in the budget for education. Man, how dare they ask for things that are basic necessities here? How dare they? The nerve of them. But the demands have since widened to include a national negotiation to address political corruption and discuss larger political reforms. And this is why I said, if you start with the workers first, then you can get to the other issues. You start with the workers, you start along class lines, you come together, and then you can get to the larger political issues. That's what we've been advocating for. That's what we want you to do. That's what we think could actually work in this country. But if people are only going to protest and unite over the fact that so-and-so's on the left or so-and-so's on the right, then we're always going to lose. Because then we're not fighting back against the 1%. And let's be real, there aren't enough of us on the left to fight back against the 1% on our own. We need other people to join with us to fight against the oligarchs. We can't do it on our own. We do not have enough people. So this is something that I want people to understand. Panama realized that. Let's go back in. So it goes on to say the current situation in Panama is unbelievable. This is coming from Dominguez, who studies medicine. There are no medical supplies. There are salary cuts and there is no work. There is no money to pay the doctors. As a student, the future worries me a lot. Now, in the United States, there's work, but for who and where are the jobs, right? I would argue that people that live in the rural parts of America don't have that many job opportunities. I would argue in reference to where they say here there is no money to pay the doctors. We have people here in the United States that have that same problem. They don't have enough money to pay the doctors. I would argue here where it says that there are no medical supplies and there are salary cuts. Well, we have medical supplies here, but depending on where you live, that can be far and few. If you go out to some of these rural towns where they don't have hospitals, and they have to drive far out, sometimes an hour away, just to get medical supplies, we are heading in this direction if things do not change in this country. This is where we're headed. Have they made the announcement yet that we're going into a recession? I'm sorry. Am I just supposed to say the R word? Because I know, politicians don't like saying that word. But that's where we're heading into. And we predicted this. And Professor Wolf predicted this last year. He said this was going to happen and it was going to happen this year. So if you think about it, we are not that far off from what is happening to people in Panama right now. Not being able to pay the doctors, not having medical supplies. Again, depending on where you live, that is the case. And having salary cuts. And we're supposed to be the wealthiest country in the world. But you don't have to hear it from me. I want you to watch a clip here. I'll just play a little bit of it here so you can see what has really been happening.
For 2 weeks, protests have taken to the streets of Panama, demanding the government take action to combat the high cost of living. Prices of gasoline, medicine and basic food items have doubled since the start of the year.
People are protesting everywhere, and we are ready to start an indefinite strike until they sit down with us to discuss and find solutions to this unsustainable situation.
Teachers were the first to demonstrate at the start of July, but they have since been joined by construction workers, students and members of indigenous groups.
See, they started with the workers first, and then they also got people of indigenous groups and the students, but they started with the workers first.
In the central province of Veraguas, protesters blocked the Pan American Highway, affecting access of goods to the Panama Canal from other Central American countries. President Laurentino Cortizo blamed COVID and the war in Ukraine for the cost hikes. He promised to reduce the price of gasoline by 24% and freeze the cost of 10 basic food items to try and dissuade protesters.
Do you see how these sanctions are affecting everyone? It's not just Russia and Ukraine. It's affecting other countries as well. This is what we said would happen.
One of the
problems now hitting Panamanians and the world is rising fuel prices and the consequences. For that reason, I set up talks to address high fuel costs directly impacting the cost of staple foods, with the objective of finding concrete and feasible solutions.
But on Tuesday, protesters called the offer insufficient, demanding larger reductions and vowed to keep up their pressure on the streets. Analysts say the problem lies in an unequal economic recovery following the pandemic.
An unequal economic recovery following the pandemic. And this can happen anywhere. And I can guarantee you, the leadership who was just speaking a moment ago, I can guarantee you he has food. I can guarantee you he has money to buy food, to buy gas. He's probably living in a nice house, just like the prime minister of Sri Lanka. That's why they kicked him out of his house. But the rest of the people are suffering.
The macro numbers are based on a few items: logistics, the national airline, mining, and the Panama Canal. But the growth did not trickle down to the population while prices went up. So working-class Panamanians are wondering why, if the country is growing at 6.5%, they are unable to pay for medicine and gasoline.
Okay, here we go with the trickle-down economics. I want you to hear what he says right here one more time. Listen to this part.
Pandemic.
The macro numbers are based on a few items: logistics, the national airline, mining, and the Panama Canal. But the growth did not trickle down to the population while prices.
The growth did not trickle down to the population. Where have we heard that before? Right here in the United States. The Reagan years.
Prices went up. So working-class Panamanians are wondering why, if the country is growing at 6.5%, they are unable to pay for medicine and gasoline.
If the country is growing economically at 6.5%, how come the workers are not able to pay for gasoline? How come the workers are not able to buy food? This is the problem when all the wealth is concentrated at the top. This whole idea, whoever even came up with this stupid trickle-down economics, it was a horrible idea. Horrible. The workers are suffering and struggling, and the people at the top are comfortable and fine. Are they trying to have an election and vote people in? No, they hit the streets. This is why when people tell me, well, we can get these things done, we just need to pass this bill, we just need to pass this piece of legislation. Faster way is hitting the streets. I'm sorry, but that's the faster way of doing it.
The government is hoping for negotiations with union leaders, but for now, more demonstrations are planned, and a national strike is set to go ahead on Wednesday. Alessandra Ampietti, Al Jazeera.
Okay, so you just heard that. A national strike is going to happen Wednesday. National strike. See how they can just come together like that and say, listen, we've had enough. We're suffering here. Let's get everybody together, all the workers together, and let's go on a national strike and just shut everything down. This is what we've been talking about here. This is what we've talked about at RBN, having a general strike. That's basically what they're planning to do in their country, shutting everything down. And I feel that's the way to go. They can't make you go to work. And they realize that, look, they don't want to pay us what we need to eat, to live, to survive. Let's just stop going to work, all of us. And that's what they did. So they push. You have to push back. Now let's come out of the video Let's go back in here because there was something else I wanted to point to. The impact. This is important. What has been the impact? In the central province of Veraguas, protesters blocked the Pan American Highway, affecting the access of goods to the Panama Canal from other Central American countries. See why blocking off trade routes are effective? They said shut down the highway so the goods will not get through. They go on to say the highway is the route through which 80% of Panama's fruits and vegetables are transported. Excuse me. Did I go to the right one? Yeah. Economists warn the demonstrations have cost the country millions of dollars in losses and are leading to shortages of fuel and food. On Monday, most of the stalls at Panama's main produce market closed early because of a lack of fruits and vegetables. You see, this is essentially a general strike. Now they're saying economically it's caused problems for the country. It's causing losses for the country. But for who? Because obviously the workers weren't making enough to buy food anyway. Panama is really close to the United States, you guys. It's not like it's on the other side of the globe. They cut off the trade routes. Everything is stuck. Few things arrive. Roberto, a seller, told Al Jazeera, a little tomato, onions, peppers, or carrots and potatoes. And usually we can only sell 30% or so of what arrives. The rest is already ruined for being blocked for days. And then you can see people there. Passengers walk as union workers block the entrance to the international airport. Do you see, like in other countries, and I'll continue to talk about global news because I feel like I want people to see what is happening in other countries, how they really, when they shut things down, they shut it down. When they protest, they really go all out. Now, what has the government done? Responding to the protests, Cortizo, that's the president, announced a reduction in the price of fuel and plans to cap the price of 10 basic products. He blamed the pandemic and the war for the cost increases. One of the problems now hitting Panamanians and the world is rising fuel prices and the consequences. For that reason, I set up talks to address high fuel costs directly impacting the cost of staple foods, with the objective of finding concrete and feasible solutions. That's coming from the president. Cortizo's administration agreed on Sunday to further reduce the price of gas from $3.95 to $3.25 per gallon, a stark contrast to June's $5.20 per gallon. But the move was not enough to appease the demonstrators, who erected new roadblocks and pledged to continue protesting. And honestly, I don't blame them. Now that you have his attention, his full undivided attention, drain him for all he's worth. Don't just take the crumbs. Obviously, what they're doing is getting his attention. He's responding. He's changing things. Keep going at it so he can give you even more. Don't go home now. Don't go home too early. That's what happened with the George Floyd protests. And what did we get? What did we get? Oh, I know what the response was. They decided to give the police more money. Don't tap out now. They go on to say, analysts say part of the problem lies in an unequal economic recovery for Panama's various social classes following the pandemic. Here we go with that word class again. My. Of course, you are going to have unequal economic recovery after a pandemic, because you already have different classes of people. So if you get hit with a pandemic, you already have people that are divided by class: wealthy, elite, middle class, working class, poor. Of course, if you get a catastrophe, or if you have a pandemic, something like that, that is, everyone is affected, of course, those who are wealthy are going to recover economically faster. Those who are poor will continue to struggle the most. Those who are working class will still struggle, and middle class will still struggle. But for people who are wealthy, they are going to recover the fastest. That's what happens in a capitalist society. This is what happens when everyone is not on equal level. That's the problem with capitalism. All it takes is one hit. All it takes is one catastrophe. Look at what happened after Hurricane Katrina. You know who was able to rebuild really quickly? Wealthy people in New Orleans. Poor people were relocated across the country. I know. Some of them moved to South Carolina. I was in college at the time when they came over. Some of them moved to South Carolina. Could you imagine living somewhere your entire life and then you have a catastrophe happen, a climate catastrophe happen, and then the US government tells you, okay, we're picking up this family and we're sending them to South Carolina. We're picking up your neighbor and we're sending them to Baltimore, Maryland. That's what they did. Now you got to start all over somewhere else. People think capitalism is great until something really bad happens that everyone is affected.